Hello, I'm Richard with EV4U Custom Conversions, and welcome to this week's The EV Answer Man. And this week we're going to answer the question, why use an auxiliary battery? And so we'll discuss some of the reasons why you may or may not want to use one. And as always, we try to, present all the evidence. I'll show my bias, but we'll try to cover both sides of the coin. So first off, let's talk about the two methods. One method is to use a DC to DC converter only, and the other method is to use an auxiliary battery with a DC to DC converter. And so using a DC to DC converter only provides certain advantages. One would be less weight. You don't have the weight of the auxiliary battery. Less expense. You don't have the expense of the auxiliary battery. And possibly some negatives might be that it's on all the time. And so, it has to be on to run, a clock, certain instrumentation, remote, door locks and trunk release, that type of thing. You have to have 12 volts available all the time. That's what the starting battery does in a gasoline vehicle. It provides your 12 volts, both switched and unswitched, and as well as providing current to turn the starting motor and start the gasoline engine. So we need something to do part of that, and that is to have that 12 volts both to be switched through the ignition and for those sources which need to have 12 volts continuously. And so the DC to DC converter would have to be on all the time to provide for those needs. And so it would be a slight draw on the pack all the time. On the other side, the DC to DC converter is only on when the ignition's on, when you have an auxiliary battery. The auxiliary battery provides that 12 volts that's needed all the time, the unswitched 12 volts. The other is the auxiliary battery acts as a filter. And most of your DC to DC converters aren't the cleanest 12 volt source, and so you can pick up static on your stereo and so forth. And there's ways around that. You can put a filter in the line. It protects the pack from this draw. For instance, if you were to leave town and you forgot to turn off the service switch, in which we'll talk about the schematic here in a moment, and you have this draw on your pack all the time, well, short periods of time it's not an issue at all. You have anywhere from a 15 to 30 plus kilowatt hour pack. It takes a long time for a small load to affect that, but it can. There's Tesla owners to attest to that. But in doing conversion, we can compensate for that. The other is this is an item that's running all the time, and so such is life that everything has a life expectancy, and when the thing is running all the time, eventually you're going to get to the day where that thing fails, quits working. And when that happens, you're dead in the water. With a auxiliary battery, you have two 12 volt sources basically. Once you're up and running, And so there's greater reliability. You have a 12-volt battery. If that DC to DC converter fails, you still have 12 volts due to the battery. By the same token, if the battery fails, you can still have 12 volts because of the DC to DC converter. You just have to make a quick little jumper to do that. And so those are just a few of the differences, and you can probably think of some additional ones. So let's look at the schematic. For the time being, let's ignore the blue lines. We just want to look at the black circuitry. And so what you have is you have your traction pack, which is going to provide power to your DC to DC converter. The DC to DC converter is going to take your pack voltage and convert it to 13.5 to 14.6 volts. And so what I recommend is you put a service switch in here so that you can take that offline. If you go on vacation or something, you can remove that draw. You may have to reset some things when you get back, but that's better than putting your traction pack at risk. And so in your normal daily life, this switch would be closed and this DC to DC converter would be on all the time. And so coming out of our DC to DC converter, we would have that unswitched 12 volts providing power to the items I mentioned before. As well as when you turn on the ignition, it would provide 12 volts to your fuse block and all your accessories. Well, with a auxiliary battery, now we'll look at the blue. You have the 12 volt battery, which is providing your 12 volts unswitched. And once you turn on the ignition switch, it activates a relay. And that relay then closes the circuit and provides the power for the DC to DC converter. The output from the DC to DC converter then goes back to your 12 volt battery. So it basically is the same setup you have in a gasoline vehicle, in that the DC to DC converter is replicating the alternator. The alternator keeps your 12 volt battery charged, and it shares the load of the lights and the wipers and the stereo and all your other 12 volt gadgets. And that's exactly what it does in this scenario. So this would be a normally open relay, and so as soon as you turn on the key switch, the DC to DC converter comes on. It's recharging our battery, which has been drained by these 12 volt unswitched loads, and so this battery always stays charged. If you go on vacation, again, you would just simply disconnect the ground strap, or you could put a switch in and pull that out of the circuit. Same as when you switch this one, you'd have to reset certain items. Well, let's say something unexpected happens. You have a heart attack and you go to the hospital. You didn't get a chance to disconnect your 12 volt battery, or if you don't have an auxiliary battery, just run the DC to DC converter. You didn't disconnect your service switch. Now this thing is draining slowly. And if you're there, if you're gone for an extended period of time and aren't aware of the the issue there, you could deplete your traction pack over time. And in that case, that's the worst case scenario. You're not going to be a happy camper for multiple reasons. In this scenario, worst case scenario is you got a dead 12 volt battery. A lot less expensive than a traction pack. My personal preference is to use the auxiliary battery. You have a little more expense because you have battery, and you have a little more weight because you have the battery. But this battery doesn't have to be as large as the starting battery, and we basically size the auxiliary battery as well as the DC to DC converter based on the vehicle and the loads that it's going to need to handle. No use having a great big battery and a great big DC to DC converter on a Volkswagen Bug that has very few accessories. You don't have power windows and seats and air conditioning and all these things that are, you know, drawing 12 volts all the time. Save your money and put that into something else. So anyway, that's real crude, you know, schematic of what's involved, as well as some of the pros and cons. Let's go take a look at this setup in a vehicle. Typically, with the auxiliary battery, we leave it where the starting battery was in the gas incarnation, and so it's already got a mount. All the wiring is already there. It's very simple to just leave it in place. An exception to that is on the Karmann Ghias. The battery was originally located in the back corner on the Karmann Ghia, and it just really detracted from the you know, engine compartment having that battery there. And so we remove it, or I don't want to say remove, we relocate it on the Karmann Ghias. On the Bugs, it is underneath the back seat where it was originally, and so that is where it stays, in that, under the back seat, underneath the battery box or the back seat, whatever the case may be. And so it's on the passenger side, underneath the back seat location where it was originally. And the DC to DC converter we'll put on the other side of the hump where there was nothing. And so very easy to wire that up. Everything is, you know, got its home. And if you need to service that battery, there is a panel that allows you to have access underneath the seat. You can either lift up the seat if you have the seat, or if you put batteries in that position, there's a little panel that allows you access. Well, on the Karmann Ghia, in that position, it's a metal panel which doesn't allow for access. So putting the auxiliary battery there is not really an option. If you had an issue, you'd have to remove the traction pack to get to it. So in that case, what we do is we'll stick the auxiliary battery in the front nose where the spare tire went originally. So there's the auxiliary battery. Put it in a box so you have a nice, clean, you don't have any, you know, a dirty, you know, AGM or gel or flooded battery, whatever you want to use. You know, the terminals and everything are protected and so forth. But right beside it then is the DC to DC converter, right here. So they're literally inches apart, which makes for a nice short wiring run. We also have the pack charger up front, and typically on a customer's vehicle it fits in that area near the auxiliary battery. On our demonstration vehicle here, we put it right here in the center, so it's a little, so everything is a little easier to see. Point of all that is that we have wiring that comes from the pack to the charger, or from the charger to the pack. And so we have our 144 or 100 and whatever your system is, volts available right here. And so the power for the DC to DC converter is already here. You don't need to run separate wires or anything. And that's how we like to design things, to keep all of our runs as short as possible, to make as few runs as possible. And so one of the nice things is that with the auxiliary battery originally in the rear of the vehicle, the wiring, they had a large wire ran from the battery to the front of the vehicle, where the and Volkswagen has quite a mess on their fuse blocks. We're in the midst of cleaning this one up. Haven't finished it yet, as you can see. But so it was real easy then to relocate the auxiliary battery to the front and have a short run right here that then came to our 12 volts where it was needed, where originally it ran all the way from the back to the front. We left that line and we've used it for something else. Why run another wire when the factory already put one there for us? So anyway, right here then is our what we call the key switch relay, and that's the relay that we showed in the schematic, that when you turn on the ignition, this relay closes, and that then turns on our DC to DC converter. So let's take a look at that. We'll show you on the bug here first. I like to have a 12 volt gauge so that I can monitor that system, just like I like to be able to monitor the pack. So when I turn on the key, you'll see the gauge come up to the battery voltage, and then you'll see the DC to DC converter kick on, and watch that voltage climb. I'm showing you on the bug because it has a faster responding gauge, and so we'll be able to see it. So here we go. Turning on the key. Bang. You can see this battery's getting low because we haven't driven the car in a while, and so the battery was looked like it was below 12 volts looking through the camera here. And so now with the key on, cooling fans are on, and so forth, and that DC to DC converter is recharging our battery. Let's go take a look at on the Karmann Ghia. The gauge on the Karmann Ghia is a little slower to respond, and so you won't see that initial battery voltage and then the DC to DC converter. It kicks on before the gauge reaches the 12 volts. But we can still monitor the 12 volt system and know that the DC to DC converter is working, which is a key aspect of this. So you can see it's all the way up beyond the 13 volts it would be if it was just a fully charged battery, and it goes up to about 14.6 volts, and we have cooling fans going as well as instrumentation. And you can see again, I've been out of town. This vehicle hasn't been driven in several days. The battery has discharged, and so the DC to DC converter is pulling 3.2 amps out of our pack. That's our pack amps right there. And so normally that is below 3, and when the battery's fully charged after it's been on a while, we'll see that drop down to very little, just the draw to maintain, you know, the blower and so forth. So anyway, I recommend that you monitor all systems on the vehicle, and so like I said, here we're monitoring the 12 volt system. Here we're able to monitor the pack, and so right there I've got amps, volts, and amp hours. And so this is a 100 amp hour pack, which means we have 80 usable, and the current status is that we've used a little over 14 amp hours. Alright, once again I want to thank you for watching. Continue to send us your questions. Remember, send the questions to info@ev4unow.com. We'll gladly email you a response, as well as some of them we will feature in this series. So until next time, I'm Richard Van Wahi, and thank you for watching.